Hi and hello watch fans, and welcome to another edition of The Real Time Show with me, your friendly neighborhood watchmaker, Rob Nuds. Today I'm joined by Kenneth Lamb, the man behind Arken Watches, one of the most exciting up-and-coming brands in the Microbrands scene. Kenneth, welcome to the studio.
Hey man, thanks for having me.
It's my pleasure. Do you feel comfortable when I refer to Arken as a microbrand?
Yeah, I don't take it too seriously, to be honest. I'm kind of like just enjoying, like I'm a watch enthusiast first, so you know, as long as I'm making watches, I don't really mind what the terminology is used, I guess.
Do you have a personal definition of a microbrand or a small independent, or what it takes to be even a big independent?
I think microbrand represents the kind of the deep enthusiast space within a certain price point, I guess. And then when you get into kind of micro independent or independent, you know, depending on whether you're leaning one way or another, you can rub people up the wrong way. And you know, I'm not kind of in it for those reasons. So, yeah, I don't mind too much.
So why are you in it? Let's start there.
Okay. As far as kind of watches go, it's like a perfect storm for me in a way. Like there's a crossover where kind of my tastes in design and the things that I like and that sort of thing overlap with my own sense of fulfillment and the things I want to do and the things I want to wear and the stories I want to tell. That's why I got into it, and that's why I kind of fell in love with it, sort of thing.
So where do you start when it comes to designing a watch? Because I'm looking at a couple. You've got a couple on your site. The Instrumentum, which is sold out.
Yeah.
Not surprisingly, considering its incredible retail and the features it offered for that price. And the Arken Alterum, which is still available, £599.99. That's British sterling for anyone that wonders. That's an interesting watch with a lot more going on in it than we might expect from a micro brand at that price. But I'm looking at the Instrumentum specifically because it has the bracelet, and I'm seeing some inspirations within that bracelet. I won't put a finer point on that at this moment. I'll let you do that for me. Where do you start and how do you go about building a watch from scratch?
Well, I think with the first watch, because of the time like that we were in when I was designing it, which was, you know, the smack bang in the middle of COVID, right? And I was designing not with the intention of it becoming the brand that it is now, but it was like a culmination of things that I wanted to see. And I was at that point in my career before watches where I was ready to make that first serious watch purchase, right? And I had all these different ideas, but because of COVID, it felt like a dangerous decision to kind of like dump all my hard-earned cash into one watch that I'd kind of worked so hard at, not knowing what my fate would be after COVID had subsided. So I started designing kind of with the idea that if I was to wear one watch for the rest of my life, taking into consideration the things that I liked from design, whether that's, you know, kind of Japanese and Scandinavian minimalism, but then, you know, I have a kind of a strong interest in British military watches. You know, what would that watch look like? So I kind of like tried to merge them together in the way that, you know, I felt made sense to me, and it happened to be that watch was appealing to more than just myself, but that's kind of the reason why there is only one color. Like there's only one dial, there's only one style. It was integrated because it was only supposed to be worn that way. And yeah, I just kind of designed it around myself really, and then left the kind of the things to come after, you know, I'll think about that later sort of thing.
I am interested in the sales model that you pursued because it is quite hard-lined and unusual and refreshing in many ways. But I want to talk a little bit more about the specific design elements of the watch. So I want to know which watches you looked at and which watches you pulled things from and where we can see those watches' inspirations pop up in the Instrumentum. Because, I mean, let's start with the bracelet. That is, to me, taken quite a lot of inspiration from the Vacheron Constantin Overseas. Am I right or wrong?
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of people that have said it, and a lot of people that have kind of like denoted and pointed it out and stuff like that. But if you kind of look at, there's a lot of integrated watches from kind of the 90s period that were really forgotten, and a lot of them shared that similar type of link shape. And you can actually find some watches, like even if you go back to as maybe less watch enthusiast angles of say a Fossil watch, right? There's like an integrated bracelet Fossil watch from the 90s that has a very similar bracelet construction, right? So when it comes to kind of some parts of design in terms of the watch architecture, originality is few and far between. But my kind of approach to this specific release was that, if I'm going to offer something different at this price point, why should it be an Oyster, or why should it be a Jubilee or a H-Link, or kind of what was available for every other watch at that price? And then on top of that, say if you were to kind of take it from Vacheron, there wasn't even a Vacheron bracelet in titanium at that point in time either. So there's a lot of different kind of like approaches to it, and I've been asked that question quite a lot about the bracelet and how I feel about it, and whether I feel like it treads too close to the line, I guess. And I think for me, it's very much a case of, if you take each of the individual design aspects and evaluate them individually, then you'll probably be able to recognize that there is a lot more originality in that as it is. Whereas when you kind of like, your conscious mind is amalgamating them together, then the first thing you jump to might be a brand that has done it before, because these brands have existed for decades longer than we have. So somewhere in the catalog there is going to be ties to things. But there's some other key things that I think are probably more that are a little bit more obvious once I point them out. Like let's say the hour hand specifically, not so much the minute or the second hand, but the hour hand, the way that's kind of like, a fat, strong kind of sword hand for the instrumentum, and that's also carried over into the Alterum. That's taken from kind of my favorite MOD Seamaster that was from, the Omega from the 60s that was issued to the British military. And if you look at kind of if you look at the way the watch is from, say it's on your wrist and you're looking at it from the lugs dead on, there's like there's a silhouette that kind of mimics, it's almost like a twisted lug, but it's not. Like if you look at it, it doesn't twist, so it's not a twisted lug, but there's a certain slope and fluidity that I found just kind of really mesmerizing from things like the Bond watches, that I wanted to give that same sense of kind of that energy or that vibe from wearing those watches. Because a part of, again, back to one of the reasons why I wanted to communicate my own story through watches, is that like I was picking out the reasons why people like certain watches, and I kind of fell onto this this Bond theory, the wearing experience, and why we choose to wear watches the way we wear them, and why we pick the watches we want to wear.
It is a good point, actually, how you've kind of taken the lyre lug concept, the twisted lug as it were, and brought that to meet what otherwise looks a bit Vacheron-ish in the bracelet. That's a very good point, and that it's nice of you to identify the hour hand as being inspired directly by the 1960s military Omega, because it is obviously almost a direct corollary, and all the better for it. It brings up a wider point. We've had these discussions ad nauseum on the show already, because we're very close to a lot of brands going through the same stages of development as you are, and they've also encountered the same feedback. Sometimes Parcel does criticism from people that their watches echo existing designs, most notably with the formerly Argon, now Space One project by our friend Guillaume Ledet and Theo Frey. They ran into quite a lot of philosophical debate regarding the merits of a design that clearly was closer to something that had previously been unique than something that was ubiquitous. And the segue here is via the Oyster bracelet that you brought up before. Now, the Oyster bracelet is repeated over and over and over again, and nobody ever says on a microbrand, oh, it's a copy of a Submariner bracelet, because it's just so common.
Yeah.
At what point that must be annoying in a way, like same with a Jubilee even, or a 5-link as Tudor calls it. I mean, Tudor copied the Jubilee from its own sister brand and renamed it because it was a little bit sheepish about the fact, but they're so common, they seem to have become styles in their own right, almost separate from the watch heads. that they are most famously attached to. And I guess because something like the Senna bracelet from Tag Heuer or the overseas bracelet from Vacheron Constantin, although you say it appeared frequently in similar forms in the 90s, is not quite regarded as the same standard bracelet option, they still seem like they're attached intellectual property-wise to the brands that developed them. How fair is that? Or like you said, is originality in general just not as common as we think it is?
As far as fairness goes, like I know you brought up Space One. I'm actually quite surprised that the angle that they got kind of slanted for, as opposed to, because I thought it was going to come from more of the design angle as opposed to as it did from the brand name angle, which was quite surprising.
Yeah.
For me, I guess I take a little bit of less of a serious approach, because I want people to wear watches, and I like that people are getting into watches through my brand or through Space One, or because there's customers of Space One that are probably not got anywhere close to the watches that they're potentially referential to, where they would speak more to that, whether they agree with that or not. But it's they're offering something and bringing to the table watches at the end of the day for people to enjoy. So I think they're with like you said, the bracelets that are a little bit more ubiquitous. There's less of a strict principle that kind of tweaks people out in a way. You know what I mean? Like because it is done by everyone, people don't really bat an eyelid. And with it coming from a brand like Rolex, which is so well known, from people well outside of the watch space, again, you're not going to bat an eyelid, because even if you go back to when Rolex first started using that bracelet, I would say that the style generally across the board of watches that had bracelets were also quite similar. I think when you start to make it more original, it becomes more identifiable if there's something that's similar. But I guess like if that became then very, very popular, then again, people wouldn't bat an eyelid. But would you want it to be completely available, or would you want it to be more unique? Or it's a question of like, it has to be almost replicated, the second and the third time before it can be widely available. And if you really enjoy that thing, and you say for example, you love the bracelet on a Moser, right? Let's just say you love the bracelet on a Moser, and that's not available on every watch that's available. But if it was, if you love the Moser bracelet, wouldn't you love that was on all the watches? Do you get what I'm saying?
I absolutely do. Yeah, it's a very interesting perspective. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I think one of the things that really gets me is this idea of ownership. And it comes down to the fact that in some cases, we see the design more clearly than in others. I think we're so used to an Oyster bracelet or a Jubilee, we forget that they are also designed. Like, they didn't just exist from the year dot. They've just been replicated so many times that we take them for granted. But there is design within it. And I think because we forget that, because we see them as like the foundations upon which all other bracelets are built, for example, like the Moser Streamliner bracelet is a great example, because it's so nice and so comfortable and so well machined. And we say, oh, that's something new, that's something different, it's ergonomic, it matches with the watch head, it's sort of pushing the whole conversation of sports watch design forward. That's worthwhile design. But there's no more or less, maybe even less design in terms of like replicability in that model than there was in the Oyster when it originally hit the market. So it's funny that we just discount the possibility of ownership over a design because it's been so frequently copied. And maybe you're right. Maybe having more designs ported to a more accessible price point would help sort the wheat from the chaff in a way. Like, would they survive on their merits alone rather than their novelty? Because that's an interesting question, right? We know that the Oyster is a good bracelet formation. It's a good format for any price point. It works in any price point.
Agree.
Same with the Jubilee. Now, do we think that the Streamliner can be translated down the chain? Is the problem with the Streamliner bracelet, for example, and I'm using I don't know if you meant specifically the Moser Streamliner, but you said a Moser. I'm picking on the Streamliner.
Yeah.
It's like the most complex form that they make. So the question is, can that form be replicated cheaply and still at good quality, like the Oyster or the Jubilee can actually be replicated? Or would it lose some of its allure? Or would it then lose its allure because it would be too common and there wouldn't be enough specialness about it? Interesting question. Do you have any thoughts on that subject?
That is really interesting. My kind of answer to that is that there's a process, right? Like, so right now, let's say Moser, let's talk about the Streamliner, which is what I was referring to. Like they themselves, like I know you've had Edward on the show, right? Talking about kind of the bracelet issues that they've had. Now they've got the ability to really engineer some of the most kind of fine tuned bracelets available on a sports watch, right? And to do that at a lower level is even, it's difficult at a high level, let alone doing it at a low level and still trying to maintain that level of standard. But at the same time, if it is achieved, it would be the starting point for where the development happens, right? Like it has to be done bad before it can be done good for a brand that would offer it at a lower price point. So you would never see the process that Moser has taken to get to that level that they've got now. But at a brand that was more affordable, then it would be kind of the process before it became ubiquitous. And if it became a standard, like it is for, say, the Oyster, like the Oyster has been replicated so many times that, like you said, even at the lowest price point, the quality is so good. Like the aftermarket Oyster bracelets now are so good. They're not 0.00 tolerance of a Rolex bracelet, but are they good quality, and are they, do they do the job, and are they made out of good materials and machined well and all the rest of it? I would say yeah. So I think that when it comes to the Moser thing, it's probably more of a process. But then to kind of touch on what you said about the design element and giving credit where credit is due, I think even if you, like, say for example, when we just did our bracelet, when I designed the kind of the instrumentum and it wasn't, the intention wasn't for it to be a brand that exists now. It was I could use the money that I would otherwise spend, produce something that I want, and if it did well, it did well. But I still had to be rejected by 12, 13 factories to agree to say, yeah, we'll do this in titanium, knowing full well that every other factory was ready to do it in steel because they had the setup ready for it, whereas they would have to take a risk if they wanted to do something like that in titanium with me. So there's that element to it. And then at the same time, I'm pretty sure you probably had the discussion about kind of watch design, right? Like just like if you just take the watch head, there is like a very limited amount of ways that you can display time, unless you start to you get into your kind of your HYTs or your MBNFs and that sort of thing, like that very kind of obscure creative architectural way of displaying time. If you're just telling time in a way that every other tool watch kind of tells time, there's a limited way of designing it. Now if you're looking at if you think that there's a finite number of ways to do that, if you look at a bracelet, there's even less ways, right? Like there's even less ways to articulate it in a way that is completely reimagined. And that's why you often find, like with some of the watch brands that are doing these revolutionary ways of creating a watch head, they know themselves that it would take just as much time, just as much effort, and just as much consideration to develop a bracelet that also embodies that complete whole sense of originality. Because at the same, the bracelet is and should be considered to this as a complete thing with the watch, which is where I think the bracelet that I used for the instrumentum was considering the watch as a whole. And that's why, whether you kind of identify the bracelet as being a one of one or not, if you look at the way it integrates with the watch, there is more seamlessness with the case of the watch than you would probably find if you were to stick that bracelet on any other watch. You know what I mean?
Yeah, very much so. I think you've done a great job, because I totally agree that you should design them as one fully realized whole. They certainly shouldn't be looked at as separate components, or the bracelet as an afterthought, which many brands, even bigger brands, do on the regular, and that drives me mad. Okay, I've put you through the mill on the bracelet side of things. I think I made you talk for like 20 minutes, but
sorry about that.
No, absolutely wonderful. I mean, every show on the Real Time Show needs to offer something different to the audience, right? I mean, you're a young brand, you don't have decades of heritage, you don't have a catalog full of models, but you do have an immediate experience of what it's like to design in this crowded market. And I think that getting those insights, understanding that, we can talk about these things openly. I mean, I don't mean any insult by saying, oh, it reminds me of the overseas bracelet. Like, it starts a conversation there where we talk about, what is valuable in design? Why do people do it? What the importance of it is for consumers at different levels of their collecting career. And you are working with consumers who I would assume are generally quite new to the luxury watch market, mostly because of your price point. £430 was the instrumentum.
It was actually 360. It was 360 at launch.
Oh, good grief! I mean, that's ridiculous. Because it's a titanium watch. It's a full titanium watch.
Yeah,
that's a lot of titanium for three. How much? 360.
360 was the launch price.
Oh, that's taking the piss, man. Okay. I just want to talk about one other element of the watch itself. We could spend hours talking about every element, because I'm sure you spent months of your life agonizing over each one. But I want to get onto the sales model quickly. I just want to touch on the crown, because I love big crowns. And when I say big crowns, I mean crowns with a sufficient diameter. And I obsess over old school 35mm Patek chronographs with crowns that look like they have been ripped off a modern dive watch and stuck on the side. I think it's the coolest thing ever. A lot of brands try to reduce the crown and its visual impact to a size at which it is barely usable, just about usable. I don't know why brands do that, but where did the inspiration for your crown, which has got a very healthy diameter, come from?
I share the same aesthetic appreciation, I guess, as you do. So like from the get-go. So I kind of designed each of the elements of the watch kind of individually based on the spec that I knew that I wanted to wear, right? So that's why it's 46 lug to lug, and that's why it's 12 millimeters thick, and the crown being 8 millimeters. That was like how I entered the door. I was like, I want a crown that's 8 millimeters, because I know from the watches that I wear that that's the size that I like. And there's just regardless of whether the inner tubing, the crown tube, or the gaskets make the rotation of the crown smooth or not, if you have a big crown, the setting of time is just so much more satisfying, and you don't really have to fiddle with it. And I don't really I like to make things as simple as possible for myself, and kind of I will beat the watch up and not really worry too much about it. So when it comes to setting time, I'm kind of, it's the same way. I'm just like jamming my fingers, grabbing the crown and setting the time. So having a crown that's bigger just made more sense. So that's kind of where it came from. But having the symmetrical crown guard was where I felt was, if I was going to have a big crown, that's the way that I wanted to symmetricalize, if that's even a word.
Probably not.
Probably not. Yeah, I will. Yeah, I'm likely to use other words that are completely made up. But you get what I mean, right? There's a seamlessness, and that was important.
Symmetricalize has been used several times on the internet by other people already. So
It should be real.
Maybe it wasn't a word, but I don't know what the modern standard for a neologism is. But I mean, I think if you use it in like 5 published works, then it can be considered for inclusion in the dictionary. So here's another one. The Real Time Show is
okay. It's one of the reference points.
Right. Just go on another 4 podcasts.
Yeah.
It's symmetricalized on every single one.
Yeah.
Okay. Really weird, nerdy question for you. Last one on the crown, I promise. When you're setting the hands.
Yeah.
What's the cannon pinion tightness like? Is it loose, like do the hands spin around easily, or is it tight? Do they have like a satisfying sort of grip to them when you're turning the crown?
Are we on about the instrumentum or the Ultram?
Either one. I mean, I guess it should. I mean, roughly, it could be the same on both. It's about a QC issue. I notice sometimes, because I'm particularly anal about it. I always was when I was at the bench. I was really particular about cannon pinion tightness. So that's how tightly the cannon pinion, which carries the minute hand, is pinched around like the middle pivot that normally carries the second hand, like the third wheel pivot. And it affects how easy it is to turn the hand. So if your cannon pinion's loose, then they sort of spin round like there's no traction whatsoever. And I hate it when this is the case. I'd rather have, if anything, a slightly tight cannon pinion, although that can cause other issues. But I prefer to feel like I'm actually moving the hands like I'm having to. And I've noticed in a lot of watches I've bought recently that the cannon pinion tightness is disturbingly light. It's just barely there. Like the hands are flying around the dial. They don't feel like they're connected. Do you pay attention to that in your quality control process? Is it something that bothers you, or do you think I'm just a complete weirdo for caring?
No, I don't think you're a complete weirdo. I think I'll tell you what, this is something that has kind of appeared on my radar recently, right? And you know when you notice something and then you can't not notice it?
Yeah, all the time.
That's what this is for me now. So I think I got away quite lucky, I think, with the Instrumentum with regards to kind of crown action, because I would say the Miyota movement, the Miyota 9015 movement, standard wise, like the kind of, if you felt one, you felt them all, right? But when it came to the tension on the Instrumentum, because of the way that our crown tube gaskets are, so there's not a kind of an O-ring that's on the crown. So if you pull the crown out, a lot of watches will have an O-ring gasket on the crown that pulls into the crown tube, right? But with the Instrumentum, my gaskets are on the inside, so that will kind of like give a certain level of resistance when you're turning the crown. So regardless of whether the pinion is tight or not, you're getting some feedback that feels nice because there's this kind of rubberizing internal part to the crown tube. So I kind of got away with it lucky, because like I was designing the watch to be like a 300 meters water resistant, right? So then I got the good crown by accident. But then recently, a friend of mine, he was showing me the new titanium Halios Seaforth, right? And I'm a huge fan of Halios. Like Jason is kind of one of the people that inspired me to kind of take a swing at this sort of thing from listening to his story and that sort of thing. And he said to me that, so my friend who had the Halios, he said, feel this crown. And I was kind of like, what the heck is this? Like, this is what a good crown feels. This is what like a very, very good crown feels like. And now that I've seen that, I know that coming into like design from here run out, like the next watches that I design from here on out, I'm going to be kind of picky about that because it's been put on my radar. So that's his fault now. But I guess people will benefit from that, and you yourself included.
Yeah, well, thanks very much. Thanks to your mate with the Halios. I really appreciate it. All right, talking about buying watches, because it looks like I might have to buy a couple of new ones now. Talk to me about the sales process of the Instrumentum. So you mentioned there was initially a £360 pre-sale price or something along those lines. But one thing that's very noticeable about the listing online is limited to 300 units. Once sold, no more will be made. No colors, no iterations. And it's engraved, actually numbered engravings. So you are a man of your word. You're not just doing one of 300 and making 360 if they sell. You're doing 300 pieces, and that's it. The model is done. It's finished. It's gone. It is part of the brand's history. Why did you decide to do it that way?
There's kind of there's two different kind of points to this. One of them is that, so when I was kind of like launching the brand, I kind of went on the thought process of thinking, do I do it on Kickstarter? Do I do it on my own website? That sort of thing. And from what I kind of deducted is that it felt like a better thing for me to do it on my own website, to launch this on my own website, so that when people back me and people kind of support the brand, they know that I'm taking a risk too, right? Whereas if you do it on Kickstarter, you back someone's money with your own money, whether they fulfill it or not, they can't just cancel it and refund it. I can't just run away with the money. Like, I'm putting my neck on the line with everybody else, and I'm saying I will see this to the end. So that was my process. And in doing so, I wanted to have something that when I was giving to those customers that literally gave me the luxury to design watches now, they've got a piece of the history of the brand that nobody else has, that's special to them. regardless of how far we go or how big we grow, that is something that is theirs, and they will be able to recognize that they were a building block to how it all started. So that's the first part of it. The second part of it is that because I designed it with this kind of singular intention, and by that I mean it was just for me. I, like most people that go into the microbrand space that don't previously work in the watch industry, like I have no previous experience in the watch industry. I didn't know how the cookie was made before I started. There's a huge learning curve, right? And I went into it very naive. I went into it with a headstrong mindset, like you almost have to be like, I want it done this way. I want this. I want this. I want this. And I kind of stuck to my guns as far as that. But it doesn't mean that the outcome was going to be the best possible outcome, because we didn't have millions in the bank. We didn't have the backing of everyone. There are limitations. So the outcome is going to be limited by those limitations. With that being said, I didn't want to continue producing a watch that I knew after the first year of producing it, lessons were learned and I grew as a person and my understanding of the system grew. And if I was to do it now, I would do it so much better just from knowing and having gone through it. So I didn't want to continue producing a watch that I know myself isn't a representation of where I know I want to be and where I know we can be. So kind of the instrumentum, that is a design that is so close to my heart, and it's so, I haven't stopped wearing my instrumentum since the very first one that we produced. Further down the line, let's say an anniversary, I can then say, okay, I will bring this back now, and I'll bring it back with all the lessons and all the improvements and, all the technology that I know we can use and is capable, the suppliers that I have filtered through are capable of using, and really deliver it to a level that is so much greater than I did when I first started. So those are the kind of the two reasons why I kept it like that, because it wasn't supposed to be a money venture. Like any microbrand owner that first starts out, there's a struggle, and it's not, I didn't want it to be just kind of like offer 1,000 colors and just spit them all out and that sort of thing, because I want it to be a very close representation of myself.
All right, let's talk about the Alterum then in comparison. Am I pronouncing it right? Is it Alterum or Alterum?
Yeah, Alterum. It's the root word for alter or alternative. So it's however you want to pronounce that.
Are you going to stick with these root words, this ending for everything you do?
I think for the ones that, so it's interesting you asked me that, because I haven't actually answered this question before. But the watches that I design that will share this design language, that have this type of kind of case architecture, I'm kind of referring to them as the Instrumentum series, because they're kind of followed on from that design aesthetic and that concept. So the ones that follow the Instrumentum series will have on them, just because I feel like I like the Latin root words, and I find them kind of interesting.
It certainly has a vibe, yeah. Normally in a podcast, it's customary to edit out the guests' in between the conscious.
So just be instrument by default.
I might do the opposite though. I might just edit out everything else you say and just leave like an hour's worth of I think it's like subliminal messaging or something like that. Alterum, £599.99 currently. That's the price. Only the black one is still in stock. The anthracite grey with the rather fetching autumnal, what is it? Orange, burnt orange, brown.
It's like a burnt orange.
It's nice that. It's a delicate touch. Very clever. Very beautiful choice of colours. Just want to commend you on that before we get into it with this model. Yeah, really nice. Love the canvas strap. Love the Everest nod there. That's really, really beautiful. But it's not limited.
No.
So this is going to be in the collection forever.
Yeah, this is kind of the first general release, because I'm quite happy with, I'm happy with the way that this is kind of executed and will be executed, and I feel like it's a good starting point for someone who wants to find the brand and what we want to try and do. Like with using a proprietary module, so it's like they know from the get-go that by this watch is like, oh, they're challenging the space here. Like they're trying to add something new, and I like that is kind of our first readily available watch, or will be.
It's quite a statement of intent. I mean, I do not want to blow smoke up your ass at all. In fact, I would love to drag you over the coals as much as I could, because I feel like microbrand owners have, more than anybody, this is just my personal opinion, but I'll be straight up with you and say it to your face. You have to justify your existence much harder than anybody else, in my opinion. When it's a small independent with money behind a concept, someone else's money normally, that's fine. You know, they're doing something worthwhile. But microbrands are 10 a penny, and standing out from the crowd is incredibly difficult. And for this to be your first, let's say, serial produced model is an incredible statement of intent. I must say, well done.
Thank you.
It doesn't look like anything really on the microbrand market, certainly not at this price point. Tell me about this module, because at 600 quid, which for our European cousins is just under 700 euros, I guess, around that point. What the hell? How have you managed to have a proprietary module made, and who's making it and where?
It's one of them things that I learned quite early on, is that I would say, you know how like microbrands now, what microbrands are achieving now almost seem kind of so crazy if you look at what they were producing like say 4 years ago. And I think a lot of that is part of that is obviously due to technology availability, right? Like let's say your average factory now knows how to use a variety of different click mechanisms for a steel bezel, right? Let's just say that. But at the same time, microbrand owners now that are entering the space with an understanding of like what is possible can ask the right questions. So if you just say went to a supplier 4 or 5 years ago and was like, I want to produce a dive watch that is 200 meters, the factory might have just said, here is a 15 millimeter diver, right? And you'd say, sweet, does it go 200? Sweet, I'll use that. Whereas now it's like you can ask the right questions. And if say, for example, with the Instrumentum being as thin as it is, my first question was, what is the thinnest possible case we could produce in titanium with a Miyota? And they were like 12 millimeters. And in my head, I was like, that doesn't make sense, because everyone else's is in steel and is like 14. So am I like being cheated here? Like, can we actually test this? Is this real? And what I learned from that is that if I'm to ask the right questions, sometimes you might get the right answers. And that's how the module was created, essentially. So it wasn't something that I was kind of straight after the Instrumentum, I was like, I'm going to make my own module. That wasn't how it worked. I wanted to do an affordable GMT or a dual time watch, but Miyota and Seiko hadn't released their, general available NH movement, and same with the Miyota 9075. So I was kind of like, okay, we can't do this unless we go, with a Swiss movement, maybe Soprod or that sort of thing. So for now, I'm just going to kind of like, play in the water a little bit, throw some design ideas around and see what happens. And I'd found a factory that was in China, but not in the region where a lot of microbrands are producing kind of watches. So a lot of the parts that are manufactured in Asia will come from, say, Hong Kong, but where Hong Kong borders China in an area called Shenzhen, or they're finding parts from Thailand, because Thailand makes some great parts. Vietnam is known for making some great dials. Like there's lots of parts around Asia that are known for making very good parts. So I'd found this factory that was deep in China that was doing decoration, basically. Like they were doing movement decoration, like rotors and that sort of thing. And their decoration was not really like your run of the mill, like, oh, we're going to laser on a main bridge, or we're going to just laser on a rotor. They were making those bridges. Like they were like, if you were like, I want a gold bridge on a Seiko, they would go and make that bridge out of gold. Do you get what I'm saying? And because of that, because I was just like, I want to find a way to like, if we could make I wouldn't have an exhibition case back for a watch, because a lot of the watches that I'm going to produce are probably going to be Japanese movements. So I wouldn't have an exhibition case back unless I could be like, that whole movement's going to be just like jet black. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, make it really cool, right? So I was just asking questions and blah, blah, blah. And I kind of realized that their capabilities were so much greater than what I was asking them. And so I said to them, is it possible for us to, if we simplify the concept, let's say a GMT hand or a dual time hand is essentially just another hour hand, do you reckon we can make that work? And they were like, I don't see why we can't have a try. Like, it's going to cost you money, and if we fail, we fail. That's on you. But we can try. So I kind of came up with a concept, and I'd cleared it with a few people that I knew that had a bit of a more of an engineering background than I did. And then I proposed it to the suppliers, and they then, relayed it to the factories, and they were like, yeah, let's take a swing at it. Let's go back and forward. And I think it was one of those things where it's like, it worked by chance because it was quite simple. Because if you so the module, I'll get into explaining the module. The module sits on top of the existing Miyota movement, right? So it doesn't interfere with what the movement is doing. It is just adding essentially another arm for it to display. It's like a display module, more so than an actual kind of integrated module. So with adding a second hour hand mount, that's pretty straightforward. The complicated part is then having the crown lock and release it. So because the Miyota movement has a specific number of steps that you can kind of pull the crown out of without actually messing with the movement itself, we had to have the second hour hand lock and release within one of the positions of the movement that already existed to keep it simple. So if you rotate the hands forward, both hour hands will go. If you rotate the hands backward, the dual time hand will lock in place because it's not designed to roll backwards. So you set the time difference first, and then you rotate both hands forward into the time that you're in. And because the time difference is set, the dual time hand will display the correct time. So it was like trying to find the simplest approach, but also asking the right questions. And that's how it was kind of like a lightning in the bottle thing. There was like, oh, this works. And I was like, oh shit, okay. And then Miyota released their 1975, and I was like, man, I just used so much time. I used it. But at the same time, it offers something different, and it offers something unique. And I like that I'm challenging the space, because that's the reason why the Instrumentum was as affordable as it was, is that I wanted to produce, at £360, I wanted to produce a full titanium 300-meter diver with all these specs for $500 and it didn't seem possible. And that was what I wanted to achieve, because by challenging the space, you're opening up the world for people to wear that type of watch and then, wear it every day and beat it up and use it and not worry about it. And that's the type of lifestyle I would like people to wear these watches in. So the challenge thing is very important to me, and that's how we kind of got there.
I have so many questions. Okay, firstly, with the Instrumentum, did you make any money? You don't have to tell me exactly what you made.
We made enough to go a second time. That was the goal. So the margins on the Instrumentum are wafer thin. Like if you think 360, and if you for people who are listening that have received one, you'll see that it comes in a military Pelican case that is not like it's not the same material that you find Pelican cases in. And it's in a size and shape that's very different. And all the details as far as the packaging and all the rest of it, they're very curated because I wanted that full experience. So the margins on the Instrumentum were wafer thin. And the goal was to basically, if I sell all 300, I will have enough to do it again next year. And that was literally my goal. And that's what we were able to do. So going on from there, it's like, okay, if I'm going to keep doing this year on year, I'm going to have to try and find a way to make this, viable. So the Ultirum is a step to making it a little bit more viable for me. But at the same time, it doesn't have the margin that you'd need to have a retailer, because a retailer requires X amount of margin. So I want to take kind of slow steps because I don't want people to feel priced out in any way or feel like, I like that when people see the watches, they're like, wow, that's great. Like they see the price and they're never like, that price for that watch. Like, I don't like that. I'd rather than be like, that is amazing. Right, let's get that. Let's wear that. Let's, and that's how I want it to always be, even if it does get to the point where we can have retailers. So I want to grow it slowly, and I want to grow it with that type of intention. So, I can get to know the community, and I can get to know the people that wear it, and they can give me feedback, and they can tell me the stories of how they went diving with it and smacked it up a rock, and they need a new glass, or they need this, that, and the other. Like, I like the idea of the watch to be treated almost like a car in that same way. And I refer to one of the guys that I work with who will be doing some of the kind of Cerakoting for one of the limited edition runs of the Ultra. He doesn't necessarily refer to him as himself as a watchmaker because he's not watchmaker trained. Like, I work with a guy who's a watchmaker, like an actual watchmaker, and then this guy who I like to refer to as a watch mechanic. So that's I like that type of approach to this. I'm not haute horology, and I don't ever want to pretend to be, because I have great respect for the watchmakers that are doing these these revolutionary things. So yeah, that's how I feel about it.
Next question.
Yeah.
The dial.
Right.
I love it. Cool texture, quite popular in Microbrand circles, but this execution looks really good. What I'm really intrigued by are the date numbers on the subdial at 6. They look to me to be raised. Is this so? And if so, is it just a single piece stamped dial under incredible pressure, or what are we looking at?
The numbers on the date, they are raised and then stamped on top of.
Yeah, right. So they're printed on top.
Yeah. So they're stamped on top of. But say, apart from the markers, the ring that connects the markers and then that outer track is all loomed.
All of it?
Yeah, all of it's loomed.
Oh, with what kind of loom?
BGW9.
Very nice. Okay. Last question. Somehow we've buzzed through the majority of an hour already, and I feel like we could probably carry on in great depth because I've only asked you about the watch, really. But this module,
right?
You mentioned before that it's unique. Is it unique to Arken, and no one else is using it on the market right now?
Right. Yeah. No one is using it. I'm not against other people using it. I think, if people use it, like with the other things, if the technology is tried and tested again and again and again, it gets better and better. So I'm not against other people using it, but at the same time, this is the first time that it's ever been done. Because I'm the one that requested it, and I'm the one that paid for it to be sampled, essentially, or paid for it to be kind of prototyped. And generally, the consensus with a lot of the suppliers is that, from the ones that I work with, they aren't going to go and say, "Here, we have this new thing. Do you want to use it?" without saying to me, "Is it okay if we use this for someone else?" Which my answer would be, "Yeah, go ahead."
Very nice of you. Okay, I have one additional question based on the back of that. So in independent watchmaking circles, it is not unheard of for brands, even well-known brands, well-known in their own right, to pool resources to develop a new watch or complication. And the example I have to hand is Singer Reimagined, H. Moser and C, and Fabergé, all working together with Agenor in the development of a movement that now powers many of their best-known models across all three brands. So they funded that R&D process together. In quite recent times, I've commented extensively on how I feel this is a golden age of independent watchmaking because so many small independents and micro brands are banding together and almost operating as a group, even though they're not connected officially, in terms of event organization and even media cost sharing, so that they can get out in front of people that would otherwise be overawed by the sheer number of well-heeled group brands dominating advertising pages and event spaces around the world. My question is, have you thought of, or are you already collaborating directly, almost officially, with other micro brands, perhaps in slightly different spaces from Arken, to do exactly that, to share the development costs on more advanced complications as you have shouldered yourself here?
Not at the moment. but I'll be honest with you, I'd love to. I think that type of approach is amazing. It's like kind of like you said with Moser and Fabergé, and even say MB&F that has a long list of all their different friends that are the suppliers for all the different parts of the watch, and they honor them, and that's how they create such an amazing product. I'd love for that to happen. Like if say if a few British brands were like, let's work together and do this, I would 100% be down. But the sad part is that not every independent brand perceives that as a good thing, because they want to keep to themselves, or they don't, maybe they feel like it might be diluting their brand, or they might be making sacrifices to their aesthetic. Like, people have different opinions on whether they think it's a good idea. And then for me, it's also like, at this early stage, I'm still very much at a point where I'm in a proving ground, right? So even though I might have been able to fund this proprietary module, off my own back, there's not necessarily a line of brands like knocking on my door saying, I want to work with you, because I've only been around in existence for a couple of years. So despite the fact that I'm very confident in what I want to do and where I want to go, I don't necessarily have the validation yet from some of the bigger brands that would maybe like to achieve that sort of thing, but they might not want to work with me, or that sort of thing. There's I have to kind of wait for those calls in a way, because like you probably will know, when you first start out in any industry, kind of knocking on people's doors or calling them or reaching out, you don't really get that much response. So yeah, my door's open, and like I said, if brands wanted to work with me, then I'd love it, because I love an opportunity to design more. Like, that's the thing that excites me. Like, if a brand said to me, Ken, come and design a watch for us. Like, we want to start making titanium watches, or we want to do a watch that's a little bit outside of our wheelhouse. Will you design it for us? I'd be like, 100%. Like, I'd love to do that. Like, I love designing. I love watches. I want to be in this space, and yeah, it's just a case of waiting for some of the bigger players to say, oh yeah, do you know what, Arken is doing a cool thing. Like, let's see what we can do with them. But at the moment, I'm not in that position to make that move.
Well, you never know. It might happen sooner than you imagine it possibly could. So you heard it here first. You heard it here first, guys, on the Real Time Show. If anybody wants Kenneth's expertise, then give him a call. You know where to find him. In fact, if you don't know where to find him, or if you don't know where to see Arken watches, then go along to arken.uk. That's ARKEN.uk. If you have any questions for Ken, then please get in touch with us directly. You can find me on Instagram at RobNuds, ROBNUDDS. My regular co-host, Alon Ben Joseph, can be found at ALONBENJOSEPH. Our resident provocateur, David Vaucher, can be found at DAVAUCHER. Or you can contact Alon or I via our email addresses. That's either Rob or Alon at therealtime.show, via the website, www.therealtime.show, or via our very new, very fresh Instagram channel, therealtime.show. Please like, subscribe, follow, and comment on the podcast. Nice things only, please. We're very sensitive souls. We'll be back soon with more top quality watch content. Until then, stay safe and keep on ticking.